Good morning from gardening at Douentza here in Ireland, and it rained last night, which you can see from all the drops here on the Stipa gigantea. Ooh, that's a bit soggy, and the fact that the garden is really quite soggy at the moment. And this is just a wonderful moment to bring you out and talk about my self-seeding plants, because there's nothing that the rain brings up more than those dormant seeds that are lying in the ground just waiting for their opportunity to spring back to life. So this video is all about self-seeding plants, desirable self-seeding plants, ones that I originally planted in the garden with the intention that they should do well, that they should seed about, that they should give me free plants every now and again. And the video is also about how to manage that process. So, welcome to the garden on this wet morning, and we're going to take a little stroll around and take a look at some of my favourite self-seeders, and we'll just talk a little bit about them. And we're opening with having a shot of this permanent border here, which was recently planted. And this, although it has a lot of perennial plants, also benefits from self-seeders, and we'll go in and have a look at them now. Now, planting self-seeders is a wonderful thing to do because it gives you the element of surprise. You get plants popping up in places you wouldn't normally have planted them, and you can get some glorious combinations as a result of it. But it's also a process that needs to be managed, otherwise you end up with a very messy looking garden. And here we're just taking a close look at a gap in one of my borders, and after the rain the seedlings that are popping up, and you can see the blueprint of everything that's going on in my garden there. We have poppies, we have Verbascum, we have a fleabane, I can't remember, that little white one that I planted originally. We happen to have some euphorbia here. And that's probably all, because actually, you know, oh, and we have Echiums there. There's an Echium. Now, of course, different seeds predominate in different areas of the garden, but it's often said that to get a new garden going, what you need is a couple of handfuls of soil from a mature garden like this one, because if you plant them, then all kinds of stuff is going to pop up and really help populate the garden. And it harks back to the Darwin experiment. He did an experiment which proved that nature abhors a vacuum. So basically he got some bare earth and planted it in prime conditions with good light and with good moisture, and just see what popped up. And he had a myriad of different species popping up just in that one space where it seemed that there was absolutely nothing in it to start with. Yeah, nature abhors a vacuum, and what that means is that if there is any blank space in a garden, something will grow there. And you know, normally that's weeds, but if you have a lot of self-seeders in your garden, it's going to be your self-seeders. And there's worse things you can do than weed out good plants from a garden. Well, that's my take on it anyway. And we're going to start off by having a look at one of my favourite self-seeders, and perhaps the easiest of all to get going, and these are poppies. And poppy seed will actually persist in a garden for hundreds of years. So once you get your poppies flowering and shedding their seed in the ground, you're always going to have them with you, but you do need to manage the process. And here we have a gap in the border, which was just a prime location for poppies, and I allowed these ones to spring up here, and it was a surprise as to which poppies exactly they were, but glorious ones they are in fact. Now I'm just going to take you to the other end of the border where we have a big gap, and this is where a multitude of poppies is springing up. And this gives you some idea of what your soil can be like if you allow self-seeders to just do their thing. So I had all these poppies that just came from nowhere, and well, they're actually doing a great job here because I had no plants to put in this space, and now I'm going to have a multitude of poppies. And here we have another spot with some poppies. And here we have an example of a poppy I won't allow to flower and set seed in the garden because, well, you know, it's a bit nondescript compared to the other beautiful double ones. So this is one I won't allow to seed, and that's just something you need to bear in mind. What you need to do is ensure that the nicest varieties are the ones that survive and the ones that are going to pop up again in your garden. So over here in this other border we can see a bit more clearly how I've been managing the poppy process. And here we have a poppy here with gorgeous glaucous foliage that I've allowed to seed and stay in this spot here because I have nothing else. The cat scared the life out of me. I have nothing else in that spot, and the poppy is going to do well. In fact, all of the soil here was pretty much peppered with poppy seedlings, and I've removed a load of them. I left a number here in this spot here because I didn't have anything else, and over here. Now what I'll do is just weed this out a little bit more. That one we will let go, although it's a bit close to the bush, but this one at the front is definitely close to the grass, so that'll come out. And so there's two stages of weeding. First of all, removing a load of them, and then coming along a bit later and making sure that they're not too close together. So for example, you might leave a couple together like this, which is obviously too close, and then after time see which one is the strongest, is doing better, and then take out the weakling. And over here in this shady area of the garden, believe it or not, we have one of my absolute favourite self-seeders. And as you can see, there's a couple of little weeds down here, but let's look closely and I wonder, can you see it? Yeah, it's this one here. It's Echium pinianina. Now, Echiums are wonderful, wonderful tall plants, and it is a real bonus to have them seeding in your garden because the seed is actually hardy. So whereas you might struggle to bring Echium pinianina through the winter, as long as it's flowered once in the garden, you're going to have so many hundreds of seeds in the soil that you're never going to be without it. And even in a cold winter where you lose all your big Echiums, the following spring you're going to have ones like these popping up all over the place. And there are two really strong Echiums, and actually over there, do you see that? There's a third one there. And these are going to make great plants. Now, of course, these are going to have to be moved, and that is the thing with self-seeders. You get plants for free, but it's not without work. This is not a good place for an Echium to sprout up. It's in here, in the shade, and Echiums like full sun. It has limited space to grow because of all these trees around. And basically it's not going to do well here, whereas I do want the plant. So with the self-seeders, what you need to be is on top of it. You need to be finding these little seedlings. You need to be digging them up and potting them, and then eventually moving them to their correct space. And here's a little something I prepared earlier. So we have two Echiums in here that I moved to this position. That's my cat attacking me. Tiger! So I moved these two Echiums here in spring because I have a big gap in here, and I think they'll do really well. They'll climb up into the light here and do really, really well. And you need to do it before they get to this size. So if I were to find these now, it's probably too late. They're for the compost because Echiums don't move well. They need to move when they're quite small if you want to have a chance of success. Another self-seeding plant which I readily welcome in the garden is the Verbascum, or the mullein, and that is those tall yellow spikes there. So the Verbascum makes a tall statement plant in the border, and we can certainly do with this kind of punctuation in most arrangements. But like with the poppies and with any other self-seeder, you do have to manage them, because you'll get too many and you'll certainly get them in the wrong place. But sometimes self-seeders will just pop it up in a place that you didn't think to plant one. But when you see it, you think, oh yes, that's going to be a perfect place for that Verbascum. And I'm very glad that it inspired me just to allow that to happen in my border, like with this particular one here. But others will be more managed, like these couple of Verbascum. I don't know if I actually moved these from somewhere else and planted them in this gap, or if they sprung up here and I just kind of thinned them out and left the best ones. But yeah, I'm glad to have them filling this gap. And just a little tip with the annual Verbascums or the biennial Verbascums that you're allowed to seed around your garden: decide on the best one first and only plant that, because they are very promiscuous and they'll cross-pollinate, and before you know it, you're going to have a mishmash of Verbascums that aren't quite as beautiful as they could be. Now, my personal favourite is the Bombyciferous type with the silver leaves, and if you find that and seed that and only grow that in your garden, I think you won't be disappointed. Another favourite of mine is the annual Alstroemeria, which we see here and which the bees certainly love. Now the Ligtu hybrids, which are these ones, are quite annual, and they flower and then they die, and then you can just remove the whole plant, which makes a nice bit of space for other plants to come along. So they kind of fill those gaps that you might have in your border if they're managed properly. And the thing is, with an annual like this, you know, don't be afraid to weed it out. If it's choking a perennial plant, then you really have to take it out, because you can't let the tail wag the dog. You have to remember that your permanent plants are the major players here in the border, and the annuals, they're just there as an accompaniment to the main display. Now, they can be an amazing accompaniment, and certainly when these cedars here are in flower, they kind of steal the show from the main permanent plants. But that's okay, because you can't rely on them. Tomorrow, next year, they're going to be somewhere else. So just enjoy them while you can, and, well, take the best advantage. Now, with this annual Alstroemeria, it can be a little bit difficult to germinate first off. So buy the seed and germinate it, but don't be discouraged by the fact that it may be tricky to germinate. Once this plant is established in your border and seeding itself, you're going to have no problem with the seedlings popping up all over the place. So let's have a little look over there at that mass of silver foliage there with the magenta on top, because this is another one of my absolute favourite self-seeders. This is Lychnis coronaria, and it's the purple variety with the magenta flowers. There's a white one as well, but I prefer this one. And it's a fantastic, fantastic plant. And when it's in full flower, my goodness, you really can't do better than that in a border. Well, in my opinion anyway. Now, when it finishes flowering, the plants go a little bit like this, you see, with the foliage kind of dying off a bit, and you can weed them out, or you can allow them to seed. And if you allow them to seed, then this is what you get. Lots and lots of seedlings, which can be used to fill a gap, or they can be potted up, they can be sold, they can be given to friends, whatever you like. But it's certainly a wonderful plant that I wouldn't be without. And you can see in here now I need to do a bit more managing of this clump, because these are too tightly packed. And I left them too tightly packed to start with, because I just wasn't sure which ones would survive and which ones wouldn't. So for example, over here we've got two on top of each other, so that one's the strongest and this one's less strong, so we will take out the less strong one. And at this stage you're probably not going to be able to transplant them, because you know, they're too big. And over here, there we have a smaller plant in at the neck of the bigger one. So we'll just take this out. And by just doing this, you're managing the plants and you're allowing the ones that you leave to reach their full potential and get as big as they should. And finally, another one of my favourite self-seeders is Melanoselinum decipiens, and I made a separate video about this plant not very long ago. Here we have one that has finished flowering and is busy setting seed, and you can see how many seeds this is going to set. So each one of these umbels will set a million seeds. Well, maybe not that many, but thousands anyway. And a lot of them will survive and pop up on the ground in the border. And I'm going to have to be on top of this thing, because this seed produces a very large plant, and you can't have large plants popping up willy-nilly in the middle of the border. They really will kill off other stuff, other permanent stuff underneath. So you really need to be on top of it. And what I do now with a lot of the Melanoselinum is very shortly I'll cut off those seed heads just to reduce the amount of seeding it's going to do. So the structure of the plant still has value for the rest of the year, but here I'll cut off the seed head, just say about there, and that will reduce the number of seedlings I get. But I won't take all of it off because I do want some seedlings. And this is a plant that is trickier to establish in seed trays than it is to allow to pop up in the soil in your garden. So I will allow it to pop up in certain places and then transplant them as needs be. And I think that kind of brings me to the end of this video. There are lots more self-seeders that I haven't talked about, ones I've used but didn't want to extend this video too long, and there are plenty I haven't used as well. Verbena bonariensis is a great one as well to try with in your garden, and there are lots of annuals that really self-seed well, like marigolds and love in a mist. There are lots of them, so you know, the world's your oyster. And I'll just end the video by saying it's probably quite a boring garden indeed that doesn't at least have one or two self-seeders in there. Little theatrical things that just introduce an element of surprise, shake the garden up a bit, and just gives the gardener something to think about. Oh yes, I could have planted that there. That actually looks quite nice. And maybe I'll think about that kind of combination myself next time, with more permanent plants or with more of the seedlings. Anyway, just some food for thought. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, give it a thumbs up and check back soon for lots more gardening videos. We're going to have a garden tour in July coming up soon, and well, lots more of other kinds of videos too. Houseplants, greenhouse, orchids, all that kind of thing. Thanks for watching as always. Bye!